The Startup Retro is a new podcast from the team behind Overnight Success.
A weekly show where we help you level up on the Australian startup ecosystem by giving you an insider's view on Aussie startups and venture capital. I'm Will Richards.
And I'm Gemma Clancy.
At OS, we curate the most important news and announcements across the ecosystem and explain a bit of useful context behind them.
The Startup Retro podcast will follow a format familiar to our readers of the weekly newsletter, but offer an opportunity for much more discussion.
So, if you want to keep your finger on the pulse of all things happening Aussie startups and venture capital, start your week by listening to the Startup Retro. New episodes every Monday, starting the 1st of July.
The Startup Retro is brought to you by Day One, the podcast network for founders, operators, and investors.
Hi, it's Chris Titley here. As part of the Fintechfun podcast series, I'm joined by Brian Pham, founder of Litecard. Brian, thanks so much for being part of this series.
Thanks for having me, and morning, Chris.
And Brian, look, you're part of this series because you were the winner of the awards night or the panel session the other night at the Fintech meetup just before the Fintech Australia Finnies, mate. So congratulations on that. How do you think your pitch went?
Just went up there and gave it my all, and I really enjoyed presenting in front of everyone, and it was an honour. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, very esteemed judging panel there, which was good. And they took quite a long time to deliberate. It was more than the 6 minutes, so it must have been close, but you came out on top. But you gave us a pitch on Litecard that night, and for the listeners out there that don't know anything about Litecard, can you talk about the backstory on how the company was established and how it came about?
Yeah, they did take a long time to judge, but I think it was because it was some really tough competition and some amazing pitches that night as well that were shortlisted. So Litecard is a company that we've been all working full-time on since March last year. And we found a gap in the market where we asked ourselves, how come you've got boarding passes in your Apple and Google Wallet and some memberships, but not all these other things like IDs, student IDs, access control, and all these other financial products?
Yeah.
And then we dug a little deeper and we found that it was because of all these integrations and approvals that you had to support that were constantly changing. And we found a huge sort of gaping hole in the market globally where a lot of large brands and volume and transactions were involved, and decided to take down the path of creating Litecard. Brilliant.
No, for sure. No, it's funny that like I go to the Gabba and the sporting tickets pop up in the wallet, then you go on a flight, they pop up in a wallet. But there hasn't been sort of more adoption, I suppose, having a physical wallet. I've got all these loyalty cards, I've got all this other stuff in my wallet, but it hasn't really been digitized. And, you know, obviously it's a big market in terms of digitization. What you mentioned ID, are you attracting a sort of step-by-step process in terms of that? Or is it sort of, you know, there's just so much going on that you're really trying to run as fast as you can?
So definitely step-by-step. I guess, like with most startups, we have to work backwards in terms of understanding what the barriers for entry are, in terms of growth and scale. But I definitely think that we have mapped out some barriers to entry into the market, such as, let's just say, a government ID project, various, let's say, approvals and partnerships with an access control provider, POS system providers, and even payment processors. And from there, really understanding like how big the market is in each one of these sectors and how ready, you know, in terms of timing Australia is, and then creating a roadmap from there to go across the world.
Yeah, nice. I suppose with the understanding of the market comes with the thoughts of cybersecurity. It comes with like what happens if things get stolen or compromised, etc. And this is from my point of view. I'd imagine that is an issue. What do you think it has been the biggest roadblock to actually digitization?
Security is a big one, and trust and adoption. And I think as not only our venture, but various industry partners start to go through these cycles of adoption and change, people become more welcome to it. Not every large brand wants to be a leader. They want to be a follower. And definitely security is a big risk. So with all our procurement, especially with larger membership databases or potential membership databases, security is often at the top of our list in terms of presentation and sort of building the relationship. And I think what makes our venture have this advantage is that we're Aussie based, so we can sort of prove start to finish where the data is stored, how it's handled, and then instill that level of confidence.
Awesome, mate. And the initiation of going full time into this company and getting things off the ground? How have you found it, and what are the challenges that you've come across? And I suppose the progress thus far with Litecard.
Yeah, awesome question, Chris. Um, so going full time into this venture, I came from a previous software development agency, which I chaired for a number of years, almost 5, and I was quite used to, I guess, um, operations day to day within the technology business. So transitioning to full time into Litecard was quite natural, and I was lucky enough to build sort of relationships with family offices and investors that understood the vision, and I was able to sort of shape how an early stage investment would sort of grow to the next stages for them. And then along the way as well, just surrounded with really talented advisors, even engineers, co-founders, to help bring the idea into a proof of concept, into a minimum viable product, and then build the relationships from there in terms of technology partners at Apple, Google, Samsung, or even POS system providers.
Yeah, and that integration piece and the partnership piece must be critical. And in terms of the vendors and suppliers that are out there, how have you found navigating that in regards to them, being onboarded with your vision?
I think right place, right time is a really good answer for this. A lot of clients say, Brian, this is a great idea because 2 years into the past during COVID would have been too early. 2 years into the future may have been too late.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think as well as a lot of technology companies like the Apple, Google, Samsung, it's difficult to get a hold of the right people in terms of approvals and then paperwork and then integration. Not because they're such a large moving beast, but because there's a lot of, I guess, layoffs happening and restructures, not only in Australia, but across the world as well. So being able to really, walk into their offices, send them an email, give them a call, and then brainstorm ideas or get these approvals signed off, and then help create the case studies with them. It's a win-win situation. It's a win for the client, it's a win for the technology provider, and it's also a win for us to help, build their vision and increase their user base.
Yep. And in terms of, we're sitting here in mid 2023 in what has been a fairly depressed funding market for technology companies, broadly speaking, in the last 12 to 18 months, with valuations coming down and potential down rounds, etc. How have you gone navigating through that and articulating the Litecard story to prospective investors?
Yeah, this is really interesting. I see this as both a challenge but also an opportunity, because I feel like now VCs, angel investors, people that are active in the space will only choose something that they really know can work and is delivered properly to them in terms of a deal. So if anything, it's helped us become a lot more sharper in the way that we present, how we present, and obviously the path to market in terms of investment and capital strategy. So it's been different. I guess the way that we really approach this is last 6 months of last year, we definitely warmed up a lot of investors or potential investors and got their feedback and said, if we were to raise capital, what would you be looking for? And then worked backwards from that and continued to polish and polish. And at the moment, we're already over halfway through our raise. So I guess starting greenfield now would be a much more challenging exercise. So we have to count our blessings for sure.
And then, putting the hat on for the future of Litecard, and let's repeat this interview in the future. What sort of goals do you have on a short, medium, or long, or is it a 12-month thing, for instance, in terms of where you want the business to be?
Yeah, so in Q1 this year we did just under 100 grand in revenue. We're looking at a 700k AUD conservative mark towards the end of this year. So we at the milestone of about 1 million ARR, we want to be raising our Series A round in an international market. And the reason why we choose an international market is because we've already got a fairly large ticket client in Asia and negotiating a few more at the moment in the Asian region as well. And just got a lot of good feedback, I guess, with analog systems that would be disrupting over there. And the most exciting part is that mobile wallets, since we enable them, they're available in less than a fourth or a quarter of the countries across the world at the moment. So we're able to ride the waves and find, strategic partners, distribution channels, as well as potential projects before they even hit the market.
Just on that point, that point, is that the leverage of, I suppose, an emerging economy that people can afford phones and things, or is it related to the internet? Is it related to anything that you kind of look at?
Just have to be careful in terms of what I say because of the NDAs and everything.
Yeah.
No,
but as a macro point of view, like a global, adoption is low-ish, 25%. I mean, will that grows up over time, you'd imagine that that is a sense of people adapting to technology or a newer generation that's understanding what a digital wallet is.
That's it's a really good point, Chris. And what's interesting about that is, developing countries or even developed countries or underdeveloped countries, you find everyone has a phone in Asia. So it's definitely a mobile first population. Um, and with the actual mobile wallet, I guess, capabilities
Yep.
overseas,
Yep.
it's usually following where the banks are approving Apple, Google Pay, Samsung Pay to
There you
transact.
go. That's probably more to my question about the approval of that, I suppose. I mean, yes, the banks here in Australia took a while to approve Apple Pay and sort of did it one by one as who's going first, and one jumped and then the rest followed. Yeah.
Correct. So the banking systems across the whole world vary a lot, and sort of approvals and legislation required to deploy that technology in different countries varies as well.
Yep.
So that's why you see a staggered deployment. Yeah.
Yeah. And so going back to the question, I'm interrupted, sorry about that, but the question about the future plans of Litecard and where you want to see the business and the verticals that you want to play in?
Yeah. So in about a year from now, we're definitely trying to work back towards an Asian deployment and having a head office there.
Yeah.
And the reason being is that, so according to CV Insights, digital wallets is currently $1 trillion market.
Wow.
And expected in 4 years to be a $7 trillion market. And the most interesting part about that is actually only 70% are payment transactions.
Right.
So
Okay. So the 30% is other peripheral items, as you mentioned, in terms of onboarding for planes or whatever it might be, loyalty cards, etc.
ID is a big one.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do service, I guess, a large portion of the digital wallet market, but I think where we create the most impact is around volume, whether it be a gift card at JB Hi-Fi, with over 1 million orders a year, enabling data collection, but also engagement, where they're already paying 3.5 cents per SMS US, and we can enable sort of a more personalized push notification that's instant, free of charge, and we get data back from them in terms of engagement. So I think those sort of projects, as well as the really interesting financial products and sort of ID or secure credentials, is something that we have been embedding ourselves in, and I foresee will continue to.
No, for sure, and it's a growing industry. The sort of the offshoots of that come with scams. They come with all these different things which can improve in terms of proving who you are when it comes to voting and things like that. There's lots of different application uses, I'd imagine, that goes through your head. But Brian, we're going to switch channels a little bit and talk about you as a person as opposed to the business when you're not thinking about adding capabilities into digital wallets and the technology and talking to partners and the day-to-day operations of running a startup. What's something out there that maybe some people that are listening for the first time and understanding the business don't know about you? What do you do in your spare time?
I actually play table tennis pretty competitively.
Right. Excellent. You're the first person. Look, I've had so many different weird and wonderful activities outside of work. Table tennis is a first.
Well, I love it. It's like a chess, but at a very fast pace. So you sort of get the same feeling if you were driving like 200 kilometers down a freeway. Not that anyone does that. But no, I do. So I try to keep active, sort of switch my brain to a different gear, at least, a few times a week, 2 to 3 hours a session.
Yeah.
And keep it competitive, participate in tournaments, carb load before tournaments, sleep different ways.
Really?
Align the body.
And then, so there's a little competitive streak in you?
Yeah, I'd say that.
and like you're pretty good, obviously. I mean, do you are there like recognitions of titles that you're that compete for?
Few tournament titles across Australia. Did represent Victoria, I think, 2 years.
There you go. A Victorian table tennis player in the flesh. How good is this recording today? Was there a state championships, by the way?
There was.
And how'd you go?
2019, 2021 or 2022. Rough, but definitely enjoy it. And I think the career's just started, and there's a lot more years left.
So who won that year? I'd like to know who the national state of championship is.
Victoria won, but it's split into different teams. So you've got like A team, A, B, C, D. Yep. And then, we just had some really amazing players that come from overseas. You know, they study here, or there's sort of like a really healthy life for them coaching here. Starting their own academies and stuff like that. But like some really amazing talent, and I keen to put some more hours in the next few years.
Mate, for sure. And look, there's a little event happening in Brisbane in 2032 that you might be aware of that you could probably start planning for. So, look, it's a privilege to podcast you and interview you now, knowing that in 9 years you'll be here in Brisbane representing the country in table tennis. Yeah, is that right?
Mate, I will do my absolute best, and I think, Chris, it's time that you change the podcast to a sports one.
Yes, that's right. Well, actually, sport and fintech, I'd love to do that. That'd be amazing. But could talk all day about that. But Brian, thank you so much for giving the listeners out there an understanding of the background of Litecard, the progress that you have achieved thus far, the future plans, and also your future plans as a professional table tennis player. Really like to, well done the other day on the pitch night at the Fintech meetup, and then also at the Finnies, etc. It was a big week in Melbourne for everyone to collaborate and network, etc. Thanks to Fintech Australia, and really look forward to catching up.
Awesome. Likewise, Chris. Thanks for having me.
The Startup Retro is a new podcast from the team behind Overnight Success,
a weekly show where we help you level up on the Australian startup ecosystem by giving you an insider's view on Aussie startups and venture capital. I'm Will Richards.
And I'm Gemma Clancy.
At OS, we curate the most important news and announcements across the ecosystem and explain a bit of useful context behind them.
The Startup Retro podcast will follow a format familiar to our readers of the weekly newsletter, but offer an opportunity for much more discussion.
So, if you want to keep your finger on the pulse of all things happening Aussie startups and venture capital, start your week by listening to the Startup Retro. New episodes every Monday, starting the 1st of July.
The Startup Retro is brought to you by Day One, the podcast network for founders, operators, and investors.